Hello, my name is Mark Bunyan and I'd like to welcome you to this Facebook event on behalf of David, my brother, and myself and our whole extended family. In October 2015, I took my 94-year-old mother away for a few days holiday in Bournemouth. One morning I asked her, because the moment seemed right, how she would like her funeral to be. I explained that we could hire in a rent-a-vicar to do it, or I could take her funeral, just as I had taken that of her sister Dude, and later of her husband, my father. She said that she preferred me to do it. Of course, the circumstances at present have meant that the funeral will have had to be for very few people, so David and I have decided that this private Facebook event will be more appropriate and inclusive. As you see, I'm wearing my court suit. I retired as a JP on reaching the age of 70 last September, but kept my court suit to be exclusively worn one last time. We're here to celebrate the long, happy, full and fulfilled life of a woman who was named Sybil Marie Reed shortly after her birth, but over the next 98 years became Poppy, Sybil, Miss Reed, Mrs. Bunyan, Auntie Poppy, Miss and Granny. To my brother David and I, she was Mum, and that's how I'm mainly going to be talking about her. She was born in Clevedon, in fact out at Norton's Wood in the Gordena Valley, on the 12th of September 1921, 3 years after the end of the First World War, in which she had lost two uncles who she would never know, and almost lost her eldest brother Phil, who, according to family law, signed up underage at, I think it was said to be 15, and was in France before our grandmother could get him out. Quite extraordinarily, Phil appeared in a photograph of troops in the trenches, which was recognised in the 1990s by his sister Sissy. Mum had already lost another brother, Ivor, to tuberculosis 9 years before she was born. But the house was far from empty when the 10th child, Sybil Marie, came along. After Phil came Irene, known as Rennie, a daughter christened Mary, but always known as Grace, Sabina, known as Bina, Kathleen, known for some reason as Dude, Walter, Walt, Cicely, Sissy, and Stanley, Joe. If there should chance to be a heaven, she'll be with them now, and my father will still be trying to get a word in. Because Phil, the oldest child, was 24 when Mum was born, Rena's sister-daughter Pam was only a couple of years younger than Mum, and the two were great friends. Pam, like her Aunt Sissy, and Uncle Joe emigrated to the United States in the years following the Second World War, and I hope that their children will have the chance to see this and know that the friendships between us continue. Their childhood was clearly idyllic. The story goes that one day Sybil was in the garden in a bright red dress, and someone said she looked like a poppy. The name stuck. To her family, she was always Poppy. Being the youngest of 10 had its advantages. There were always tales of how poor they were, but by the time Mum was born, most of them were out at work, and the income in the house was larger than when the family was younger. I once asked Jude, well, I'll let her tell you. This is Jude talking to me about her childhood just before she died in 1999.
She was so spoiled because she was the youngest. And Dad used to get her ready to go to bed, and he would take her up and put her in bed. He said, "Look under the bed, Dad. See if there's nobody, a boogeyman under there." Of course there's not. "Look behind the curtains, Dad. Look under there, Dad." This is her. "So you sure there's nobody there?" She said, "No, of course there's not." And he said, "Now you don't want to go down the toilet?" "No." "Now you're sure?" "Yes." So when he got down and said, "Dad, I want to go down the dubs." So of course poor Dad had to put a coat on her and go down the garden. And he used to stand outside. She only really wanted Dad to tell her stories and tell her about the stars and all that. And she'd sit there for an hour on end while Dad told her stories about how many the stars and the moon and what they were and she stayed there and about a couple of hours Dad had to there every night, the same old ritual. Take her to the toilet. But that was Pop. And then in the mornings it was, "What would you like for your breakfast, my love?" We never had that. We had what was given us. "Would you like some bacon? Would you like an egg? Would you like this?" So I said, "Do you know you were spotted?" So I was not. She can't believe it, you know. But it was a lovely life, really. We used to spend our lives up in the woods. We had made a tent out of moss and ferns, and we swung on the old man's beard, found our own pleasures, you know.
Nonetheless, as far as Mum and Dude were concerned, they were never such devoted sisters. The idyll shattered in May 1935 when her father, Mark Reed, died after a 10-day bout of pneumonia. She was still reeling from the shock 20 years later when she would tell me on lots of occasions, even as a young child, how she came home and the boy from next door running towards her bumped into her and said, "Your dad's dead. I've got to get a doctor." With Mark's death, my grandmother, Florence, occasionally Flossie or Floss, cleared the house and moved with my mother into a series of flats in Clevedon, the town still filled with most of her children and now grandchildren. I learned of Mum's first job when Mary, a school friend, came to tea in our house in nearby Nailsea. The friend was the daughter of the vicar of the genteel Walton St Mary, and Mum said to her, "So you live in the vicarage?" "Yes." "Where's your bedroom?" A rather strange question, but she continued, "Is it at the top of the second staircase on the right?" I was cringing with embarrassment, and then she said, "That was my room. I was in domestic service there." She didn't stay in domestic service, as with the outbreak of war she took several jobs, one of which she was particularly proud of, and I cherish the photo I took of her outside the building in Elton Road, which bears the blue plaque which commemorates all the people who worked in this building from 1943 to 1961 to develop and produce penicillin and other antibiotics. 1943 was, of course, a very memorable year for her. She had met a young sergeant from Wimbledon posted to Clevedon who courted her assiduously, and in May of that year they were married, wartime honeymooning for a few days in Bude in Cornwall. At the end of the war, and with Dad demobbed, they moved to London. where he'd been offered a good job, but Mum couldn't settle. She undoubtedly missed her family. And by 1949, they were back in Somerset, and I came along, followed by David nearly 6 years later. My early childhood was particularly full of parties with that huge family in attendance, with new arrivals of grandchildren and cousins, and when I go out shopping with Mum, we'd be bound to meet yet another person to whom she'd tell me I was related. Sybil and Bunny got a good council house in Teignmouth Road in Clevedon, and neither of them smoking or really drinking, could afford the first TV set in the street, with almost the entire road packed impossibly into our living room for the coronation. From an early age, holidays for David and I would involve cross-country journeys to Shoreham by Sea, where Dad's sister Kath, her husband Jack and our cousin Linda lived in a house less than 100 yards from the sea. Kath was a music teacher, had toured as a pianist entertaining the troops for Ensa during the Second World War, and the best evenings would be spent with sing-alongs, supper often being fish that Dad and Jack had caught from the beach. In 1960, Mum and Dad had raised enough money to buy their own bungalow in Backwell, though the solitary nature of the housewife's life in a quiet road where all the bungalows seemed full of widows proved too lonely for Mum, and 2 years later we moved to a new housing estate in Nailsea. Here, the social life was the reverse. The houses were all full of young women with babies and little interest in an older woman with teenage children. I've never forgotten a day when I came home from school, probably aged 15 or 16, and this woman who'd been alone in the house, as she was every day, desperately asked me to stay with her for a cup of tea. I'd already made arrangements to go over to one of my school friends, Norman, over the road, and in the callous way that young people do, thought no more about it when I went out. But it's haunted me ever since. The story, however, has a happy ending. Mum applied for a job advertised in the local paper, asking Dad's approval first in the way expected of a faithful little woman in the 1950s and 60s. Dad certainly didn't stand in her way, and she was soon in place as the very first infant helper in a Somerset school. She did the job very well, until one day around 1966, one of the teachers said to her that she should train to be a teacher. She was just doing the job of a teacher without getting teacher's pay. She made the decision to apply to teacher training college, which meant that the girl who had left school at 13 had to gain 3 passes at O-level. She did those O-levels by correspondence course, at the same time as I was doing my A-levels. What knowledge I have of human biology comes from that time. The function of the central nervous system, testing Mum from a primer. I have a good working knowledge of Twelfth Night. This is the air, that is the glorious sun. This pearl she gave me, I had to feel it and see it. And English language made up the trio of O-level passes. She went to St Matthias College in Bristol to do her tutor training, where she wasn't the only mature woman student, and Olive Hall became a close friend both then and for the rest of her life. Olive's husband Ben getting on with Dad as well as Mum did with Olive. They only seemed to be together for seconds before they were laughing. The family story goes that at the end of the St Matthias course, when Mum's results arrived, teenage David was upstairs sitting on his bed playing his guitar. She asked him to look at her results because she couldn't quite believe that she had passed with distinction at the top of her class. Dave, not quite sure what this meant, said that she'd better ring Dad. A lot of her family always talked about her becoming a bit, or possibly more than a bit, bossy after she became a teacher. I prefer to think that she gained in self-confidence. I've always loved the fact that when she did jury service, and no one put themselves forward to chair the jury, she'd have decided that, with the women's movement now in the front line, she'd take the chair herself. And did. But her old view of a woman's position did mean that when Dad retired, she would retire as well, much as she was enjoying teaching. It was partly, I think, not just because that was the thing that was expected of a woman of her generation, but also because she knew that that was something that he would have expected and looked forward to, spending the latter years of their lives together. Shortly afterwards, they took on, as a team, a hairdresser's in Old Church Road, Clevedon. Its name changed to Pebbles for 5.5 years. It was at that time that they both took up bowls, and Mum was very active in the charity Arthritis Care and its shop, and played in the county championship for bowls for the Clevedon team. And in the 1990s, Mum and Dad resumed a role in parenting, looking after their grandchildren, Rory and Max, at weekends. Dad died 15 years ago, and Mum went on living in the home in Lower Linden Road they had shared for some years, her interest in painting now becoming a major part of her life, and the occasional sale of a picture a highlight. The friends with whom she did painting club becoming new and close friends, including her great friend Brenda Ellis. By the time she moved to a flat high at the end of Hill Road, possibly the achievement of an ideal for a born and bred working class Clevedon girl, she was already in the early stages of the dementia which would eventually, cruelly, slowly take her away from her friends who remained, which led to her spending the final years of her life in the care of the Asa house in Whirl, close to David and his partner Annie, who had always been there for her in the years following Dad's death. Her last painting was sold about 18 months ago, the proceeds, at her request, going to the Alzheimer's Society. If this were a more conventional funeral, we'd now take a moment or so of quiet for memories or for silent prayer, but I hope I've said enough to evoke memories of Sybil, Poppy, however her life may have crossed with yours. Arrangements have already been made for the 98-year-old mortal remains of Sybil Marie Bunyan to be committed for cremation, but we have the absolute knowledge that her memory will burn bright in the hearts of everyone who knew her, including all those people in North Somerset, now in their 40s, who may have learned to read because of the late blooming career of Mrs. Bunyan. I'll conclude with 3 short poems, which I read at both Mum's sister Dude's funeral and at Dad's funeral. The first is Shakespeare. Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great, thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Care no more to clothe or eat, to thee the reed is as the oak. The sceptre, learning, physic, must all follow this, and come to dust. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the all-dreaded thunderstone. Fear nor slander, censure rash, thou hast finished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must consign to thee, and come to dust. Secondly, from A Shropshire Lad by A. Houseman. From far, from eve and morning, and yon 12-winded sky, the stuff of life to knit me came hither, here am I. Now for a breath I tarry, nor yet disperse apart. Take my hand quick and tell me, what have you in your heart? Speak now, and I will answer. How shall I help you, say? Ere to the wind's 12 quarters I take my endless way. As you know, my mother wasn't a huge fan of my own work, but when I read this final lyric at her sister Kathleen's Dude's funeral, she was very complimentary about it before she realised that I'd written it. And I read it at my father's funeral. I hope it's fitting for such a long life. Baby crying, bright spring morning, crystal sunlight, clear blue sky, glistening dew on some flower that's unfolding. Touch the moment, don't let it pass you by. Lovers kissing, summer sunshine, lines of washing flying high, new cut grass on the breeze from some common. But time's passing, don't let it pass you by. Grey-haired fellow picking apples, autumn leaves turn brown and dry, drifting smoke from some bonfire at evening. Touch the moment, don't let it pass you by. Lonely lady by the fireside, dreams of springtime's clear blue sky. Winter stars burn as brightly as summer's. Touch each moment, don't let them pass you by. The music for the opening selection of photographs was Down a Country Lane by Aaron Copland, a particular favourite of both Sybil and my brother David. We're going to end with the early 40s hit, Moonlight Serenade, initially on an ancient recording of Dad's sister Kath, the music teacher and pianist who led evenings of family sing-song that remain an ever-joyous memory of David and my childhood, segueing into Glenn Miller and his band. But we'll leave the last words to Poppy. Mrs. Bunyan, could you tell me one more time what exactly it was that the windows did?
Okay.
Yes, please, can you explain exactly how the telephone was attached?
Well, like this, you just go like this and it went in like that.
Was it a big thing?
No, little. Very little, like this.
Well done, asshole. They say dog's cacky. Dog's cacky. Right, now it's fair. Go on, so what is it?
Bed, thou art my darling. I would curtsy, I didn't
My love, I love you. Thank you for loving me.